Sociopaths are people who have very little regard for the feelings of others and who display antisocial behavior. They're expert manipulators who, when they don't get their way, often react aggressively since they lack a sense of empathy. Most of us will have encountered at least one sociopath in our lives, but not many people know that some famous people, including leaders, have been diagnosed as sociopaths. And while some may manage to control it, others throughout history have used the condition to their advantage, usually in the worst possible way. Number 10. Anyone who's watched the movie The Wolf of Wall Street will be familiar with Jordan Belfort, the stockbroker on whose career the movie is based. It details the running of his firm, Stratton Oakmont, and the charges that were brought against him when it was discovered that he was involved in a massive defrauding scheme. In the real world, we get our first glimpse into Belfort's mindset when we look at his tertiary education. Following high school, he started studying biology at American University in hopes that he would start a career as a dentist. But during a lecture, when the dean of the Maryland School of Dentistry told his class that dentistry is not a path to take when looking for financial success, Belfort immediately dropped out and started working as a salesman. He excelled at his role and managed to sell about 5,000 pounds of meat per week. But before long, his business failed and filed for bankruptcy. He decided to try his hand at stockbroking and landed a job at L.F. Rothschild, but he was laid off due to Black Monday stock market crashes that occurred in 1987. At the age of 30, he created his company, Stratton Oakmont, Inc. He marketed the company as an over-the-counter brokerage firm, and before long he was linked to more than 30 companies' initial public offerings. From the outside, the company seemed legitimate, and by all accounts, Belfort's career was on track to success. But the reality of what was going on behind closed doors was very different from the image that he was projecting to the public and his investors. It was eventually discovered that Stratton Oakmont was involved in pump-and-dump securities fraud, which involved inflated owned stock prices that were made to look genuine through the provision of false statements. This allowed him to sell the stock at a higher price after obtaining it cheaply. Once these stocks were sold, the price would then suddenly drop dramatically, and the owners of those shares would immediately lose a lot of money. Belfort would have been well aware of it, but as is expected from a sociopath, he simply didn't care that other people were losing their hard-earned money, while he profited from their misery. He used the money that he made from this scheme to attend and host elaborate parties, purchase expensive items such as cars and clothes, and before long he became addicted to illegal substances. As the company grew, Belfort eventually employed more than 1,000 stockbrokers, and the company was dealing with over $1 billion worth of stock. But the company was constantly hounded by the law, especially the National Association of Securities Dealers. Nevertheless, Belfort continued his fraudulent activities and seemed largely unbothered by the fact that he was being constantly investigated, possibly because of his sociopathic nature, which would have made him feel superior to others, and hence he would likely have believed that he would have never been found out. In 1996, the company was shut down by the National Association of Securities Dealers, and Belfort was arrested. He pleaded guilty to fraud and received a sentence of 4 years in prison, but he was released after serving less than 2. He then became an informant for the FBI and provided testimony against many of his former colleagues. Number 9. Caligula is often called the Mad Roman Emperor thanks to his strange, erratic, and often cruel tendencies. But in modern times, as we learn more about psychology, it's believed he was likely a sociopath or even a psychopath. He will forever remain one of the most notorious emperors to ever rule over Rome. After his birth, he was named Gaius Julius Caesar, and from the very start of his life, he started learning about politics, since his father, Germanicus, was a general in the Roman military, and his mother, Agrippina, along with Germanicus, was a member of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. He spent much of his youth accompanying his father on military campaigns, and he proved to be very popular with the army's legionaries. They provided him with a miniature military outfit, including boots, which were called caligae, leading to his nickname of Caligula, which means little boot. He would, however, revert to his full name once he was crowned emperor. After traveling to Egypt in the year 10, His father contracted malaria and passed away, but Agrippina insisted that he'd been poisoned by the governor at the orders of Tiberius. He and Agrippina had a tumultuous relationship following Germanicus's passing, and eventually he had her exiled along with her brother after they were accused of treason. Caligula went to live with his great-grandmother, but when she also passed away, he lived with his grandmother. Caligula's brothers were declared public enemies and also exiled, and he, along with his 3 sisters, remained in Rome as hostages. Tiberius eventually passed away in 37 AD, and while it was speculated that Caligula may have been responsible, he was still crowned emperor. But with this newfound sense of power came some very serious issues. Caligula was now allowed to do as he pleased, creating laws as he pleased and breaking them at will. He ruled with an iron fist, and his subjects didn't dare oppose him in any way. He would often start affairs with his officials' wives and openly boast to them about what he had done. He had little regard for the lives of others, and on one occasion, he was attending a ceremony during which he was meant to end the life of a bull by striking it with a hammer, but he decided to use the weapon against the attending priest instead, ending his life for no reason. He soon became obsessed with gold and acquiring more of it. He would spread gold coins across his floor so that he could walk on them. He would have gold loaves of bread on his dinner table and drink cocktails made from vinegar and melted pearls. He was so enamored with his own image that he had a temple built and dedicated it to himself. He had a golden statue made of himself and placed in this temple, after which he ordered his staff to dress it in the same clothing that he wore each day. Keep in mind that he was enjoying ridiculously expensive meals, having affairs with many different women, and having golden statues erected, and many of his subjects were struggling to find work and food to eat, but he remained unbothered. He ended up having many of his senators executed, ordered that Tiberius's grandson's life be ended, and insulted a member of the Praetorian Guard, which led to his downfall. He'd become unpopular with the Roman elite, and in 41 AD, his advisors conspired to have his life ended, finally bringing his reign of terror to an end. Number 8. Pablo Escobar, the famous Colombian man whose name is synonymous with illegal substances, was born in 1949, and even in his teenage years, he was regularly in trouble with the law. His first criminal enterprise involved selling fake diplomas, stealing tombstones from cemeteries for resale, and smuggling stereo equipment. He also started selling counterfeit cigarettes and stealing vehicles, while also selling fake lottery tickets. As an adult, he became involved in the sale and smuggling of illegal substances, and on several occasions kidnapped his victims only to set them free once his demanded ransom was paid. He established smuggling routes to Peru after establishing his own cartel, and before long also started smuggling illegal substances to Ecuador and Bolivia. This was merely the start of a massive empire that he would eventually rule over with the aid of the Nicaraguan Sandinista government and Cuba. He started targeting government officials for assassination, and before long he was smuggling about 70 tons of illegal substances into the U.S. As is to be expected, he was often confronted by the police, politicians, and even the public, which led to violent events that cost many people their lives, but never Escobar's. Even police officers and judges weren't safe if they opposed him. Thanks to his illegal activities, he soon became one of the richest people in the world, earning around $420 million a week. He bought private planes, several expensive houses, and hosted lavish parties that were attended by his colleagues and members of other crime syndicates. Before long, he had so much money that he didn't know what to do with it, and so he resorted to storing it in warehouses and burying it in fields. Hence, much of the cash deteriorated and was never found. At his most valuable home, the $36 million Hacienda Nápoles mansion, he had a soccer field built, dinosaur statues erected, a bullfighting arena installed, and eventually he established a zoo. He also had an airstrip, which meant that he could fly to and from the mansion whenever he needed to. In the zoo, he kept zebras, elephants, ostriches, camels, and giraffes, most of which were illegally smuggled into the country. He was also known as a ruthless killer who would have no second thoughts about having someone's life ended if they stood against him or even disagreed with him. It's estimated that by his orders, as many as 4,000 people were executed. And on one occasion, he went so far as to have a plane blown up since he believed a man who was working with the police against him was aboard. He was eventually forced to go on the run from the law, but suggested that he turn himself in on one condition, that he build the prisons where he were to be incarcerated. This suggestion was accepted, and he built the La Cathedral prison. The building contained fax machines, phones, computers, a pool, sauna, waterfall, and a nightclub. He remained there for a while, but after ordering the execution of 2 rivals in prison, he was slated to be relocated to a normal prison. But he escaped before this could be done. He retreated to his hideout in Medellin, to where he was tracked, and in the resulting firefight, he was wounded and lost his life. Many people believe that if Escobar weren't a sociopath, he would never have been involved with these illegal activities as a teenager, and perhaps his life would have been very different. Number 7. Genghast Khan, one of the most successful leaders of all time, is known as a brilliant strategist and talented military innovator. But today he's considered to have been a sociopath who would stop at nothing to conquer as many areas as he could. Khan and his 2 sons used their brilliant military strategies to conquer tribes from the Adriatic to the Pacific Ocean, and managed to make their way to Finland, Hungary, Croatia, Poland, Vietnam, and Japan, to name just a few countries. Before long, Khan had amassed an empire the size of Africa, and by 1240, he'd conquered most of the planet. Or so it was thought, since Australasia and the Americas remained unknown to the Mongols of the time. While this seemed like an impossible feat for just one group of warriors, the truth is that Khan fought battles on more than one front at a time, and many people believe that he achieved the success he did thanks to the Mongols' expertise at archery. They were excellent horsemen and were able to hit small targets at a distance while galloping at speed. This was a skill that much of the world hadn't learned yet, which meant that Khan's forces were superior. Furthermore, he lived by a code of surrender or die, and most enemies who faced him would quickly adopt for the former to avoid the latter. Some historians consider him to be a genius who was ahead of his time, while others believe he was a barbaric leader who would cut through his enemies without remorse or a second thought. It's also been suggested that his sociopathic tendencies stemmed from his childhood, which was far from ideal. At the age of 9, enemies of his father poisoned him, and his mother was exiled from their tribe. This meant that she had to raise her 7 children alone, and Khan was left to hunt and provide for the family. It's also believed that while still young, he and his half-brother got into an argument over food, and that he ended his life as a result. He got married while he was still a teenager, but shortly afterward, he and his wife were abducted by a rival tribe, and he was forced into slavery. He managed to escape, and by the time that he became an adult, he'd learned to fight as a warrior, and he started gathering an army. He spoke to the leaders of nearby tribes, with whom he forged alliances. This started the conquests of Genghast Khan, who set out to conquer the world. It's believed that as many as 40 million people lost their lives thanks to his campaigns, which resulted in the whole planet's population being reduced by 11%. Number 6. Considering that Bernie Madoff ran one of the largest Ponzi schemes in history, it isn't surprising to learn that he was a sociopath. In order to pull off such a scheme, one needs a disregard for the well-being of others, since he knowingly stole money from many people, but was seemingly unaffected by their loss. In fact, after his nefarious dealings were uncovered, and he was forced to face justice for what he had done, he claimed that the 2 decades that he spent deceiving investors, some of which were his friends, put him under a massive amount of strain, and that his victims were as much to blame as he was. He added that when his investors realized he could achieve double-digit returns, they should have realized that not all was as it seemed. This is a classic sociopathic trait in which blame is shifted from the guilty person in order to garner sympathy, when it's in no way justified. Madoff has, however, repeatedly insisted that he isn't a sociopath, and that he's been unfairly painted by the media as a criminal who set out to deceive people from the very beginning. He claims that when he started trading, he did it by the book. But according to him, he then met some unscrupulous people who forced him to take losses and then failed to compensate him. He says he had no other choice but to turn to a life of deceit and crime, once again blaming his decisions on others. It all started in 1980, though Madoff would have the world believe that he only started running his Ponzi scheme in 1992. He started collecting millions of dollars from individuals, hedge funds, charitable organizations, and pension funds, claiming that he had the unique trading strategy that will see his investors raking in a lot of money. But this was all a ruse, as it was later discovered he'd never traded any shares for his clients' accounts. He continuously showed positive returns that by the year 2000 caught the attention of Harry Markopoulos, a financial analyst who then alerted the authorities. He continued to report Madoff's shady dealings, but for reasons unknown, the U.S. Security and Exchange Commission failed to act for several more years. By 2008, his clients had started requesting redemptions to the tune of $7 billion, but he was unable to come up with the money. He then admitted to his sons that the entire business was one big scam, and that he had defrauded his investors of about $50 billion, though the amount was later alleged by prosecutors to be as high as $64 billion. In December of 2008, he could no longer hide his deception from the authorities, and he handed himself over to the police. He could offer no explanation at the time, but in the years since, he's pointed his finger at many people in an effort to absolve himself of blame. All of his assets were frozen, and a judge appointed a trustee to restore his 4,800 victims' money that he had lost. He eventually pleaded guilty to all the charges against him. Number 5. Charles Manson needs no introduction to those with an interest in serial killers, since he's likely the most famous one of all time. In 1967, he'd already spent time in prison when he decided to move to the Spawn Movie Ranch, where he proceeded to gather followers, eventually creating a group that he called the Family. He told his followers that he was pursuing a career as a musician, and he had ties to some famous musicians like the Beach Boys, who recorded one of his songs. But in reality, he was a sociopath who would go on to order his family to end the lives of several people. Whether the family was a cult or not is a subject that's still being debated today. But whatever the case may be, he was a cunning and charming man who could easily convince people to do his bidding, and he used this to his advantage to wreak havoc in California. There's no doubt he had a difficult childhood, which likely contributed to his sociopathic nature. He never knew his father, and his mother was a 16-year-old who was sent to prison for robbery. He was then sent to live with his uncle and aunt in West Virginia, but he was soon in trouble with the law himself, and was sent to several different juvenile facilities, and later on, prison. He started committing robberies, larceny, and auto theft, but seemingly wasn't very good at any of these. He moved to San Francisco in 1967 after being released from prison, and by the next year, he'd gathered his followers on the ranch. He used science fiction and the occult in his religious teachings, claiming that a race war was about to break out that would result in the end of the United States. In 1969, he enacted his plan and ordered members of the family to travel to the house of Roman Polanski, where they ended the lives of Sharon Tate, Jay Sabry, Abigail Folger, Wojciech Frykowski, and Stephen Parent. But they were not the group's only victims, as they ended the lives of Lino LaBianca and his wife Rosemary the following night, also at the orders of their leader, Manson. But they would not get away with their crimes for long. The cult members who were involved were tracked down and arrested, along with Manson. The resulting trial captivated the U.S., but the proceedings were often interrupted by members of the family, who loitered outside the courtroom, many of whom carried sharpened blades. They also attempted to dissuade witnesses from testifying, and in the courtroom, Manson on one occasion attempted to attack the judge after he was denied permission to cross-examine a witness. When Manson was called upon to testify, the jury was removed from the courtroom, as it was believed he'd be able to influence them with his charm. He made several confusing and erratic statements, often blaming music from the time of what had happened. When he appeared at the penalty phase of his trial, he had shaved his head, stating that he was the devil, and that the devil had always had a bald head. He and his co-conspirators were all sentenced to be executed, but this was later changed to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He would, however, pass away while still incarcerated in 2017, and today he's remembered as one of the scariest serial killers in modern history. Number 4. Many historians claim that Joseph Stalin, the Soviet dictator who ruled over that area for 25 years, exerted more political power than any other leader in all of history. Many people aren't aware that he actually wasn't born in Russia, but rather Georgia, which lies on the Black Sea. He grew up poor since his father was a cobbler who suffered from a drinking problem. He would regularly assault Stalin, but this ended when Stalin decided to relocate to Tiflis Theological Seminary, where he started studying the writings of Karl Marx, leading to his interest in communism. In 1899, he was expelled for what was described as revolutionary activity, though some sources state that he left of his own volition when he fell ill. For a short time, he became a clerk at the Tiflis Observatory, and this is believed to be the only paid job that he ever had, other than during his career in politics. The following year, he participated in demonstrations and strikes after joining the political underground, but he soon became unpopular as he was fond of violence and goading his fellow protesters in clashes with the police. In 1903, he joined the Bolsheviks, a wing of the Russian Empire that competed directly with the Mensheviks. He became a devout follower of Lenin and was arrested on several occasions for more revolutionary activities. He would often escape, though, leading many people to believe that he was working with the imperial police. Lenin promoted him to serve on the Central Committee of the Bolshevik Party, and when his son was taken prisoner by German soldiers during World War II, he refused to secure his release in a suggested prisoner exchange. He continued to rise through the political ranks and eventually became the undisputed leader of the Soviet Union in the 1930s. He was known to be a ruthless ruler, but the worst was yet to come. In 1934, he decided to get rid of his rivals during a series of mock trials known as the Moscow Trials. Anyone who opposed him was removed from office without warning, many of whom were then imprisoned or executed. Members of the Red Army and military high command were also put on trial, wreaking havoc on the military. Known as the Stalin Purges, hundreds of thousands of people were accused of different crimes such as espionage and sabotage, and when found guilty, their lives were ended, or they were sent to labor camps. His aim was to create an atmosphere of fear in the Soviet Union, but he suddenly changed his mind and condemned the executions that had been carried out. He had the chiefs of the NKVD who'd carried out the execution arrested, and their lives were ended. The purges had finally come to an end, but by that time between 700,000 and 1.2 million people had lost their lives thanks to Stalin's paranoia and sociopathic tendencies. He remained as paranoid as ever, and for the next few decades, the Soviet Union existed in an atmosphere of fear, as surveillance was constantly being carried out. Number 3. King Leopold II of Belgium is remembered for the many atrocities that he committed in Africa after becoming king in 1865. He decided that Belgium should become an imperial power, and to this aim, he developed the Congo River Basin and created the Congo Free State, which is now known as the Democratic Republic of Congo. He persuaded people in Africa that he was a philanthropist who was bringing Christianity to the continent, and he employed explorer Henry Morton Stanley to survey the Congo River Basin, after which he established trading posts and roads. He then persuaded local tribe chiefs to sign treaties with Belgium, all the while being aware that they were illiterate and likely had no idea what they were agreeing to. When the treaties were signed, they were altered after the fact to suit Leopold's whims. He claimed a large portion of Africa as his own personal property, and somehow convinced the US and larger countries in Europe that this was indeed the case. He named it the Congo Free State, which then became a private colony that he ruled over as he saw fit. His end goal was to enrich himself using the territories that he had claimed. He started dealing in ivory, but when rubber became a popular material all over the world, he decided to abandon the ivory trade, believing he could make even more money by processing rubber trees. By this time, he'd amassed an army of 19,000 soldiers. They were called the Force Publique, and what followed illustrated Leopold's sociopathic nature. He ordered his army to march into villages, after which they would gather the women and children. They were then told to go into the rainforest to gather rubber trees, and that their loved ones would then be released once they'd reached the predetermined quota each month. But as use of rubber became more popular, its price soared, and the quotas were increased to impossible amounts. Soon, the trees close to these villages were gone, and the men were forced to walk miles to find new trees, all the while fearing that their families would be executed. Those who were not sent into the forests were forced to build roads and chop wood that was used to power steamboats. But many of these workers lost their lives due to being overworked, and in the villages, people started starving since they had no food to eat. People in the neighboring villages fled after learning of the atrocities being committed, and after hiding in the forests, they struggled to survive, as there was precious little to eat. In a few cases, villagers attempted to start a resistance, but were promptly executed. Thanks to the resulting famine, diseases started to break out in the villages, resulting in more lives being lost. The birth rate among the villagers dropped dramatically, and it's estimated that the population dropped as much as 50%. The international community eventually took notice of Leopold's actions, and he had no choice but to give up his ill-gotten territories, but he insisted that he be compensated for the loss by the Belgian government. Leopold eventually passed away in 1909 after suffering an embolism. Number 2. From an early age, Ismael Pasha showed signs that he would become a great leader one day. He was one of the organizers of the 1980 Young Turk Revolution, and in 1911, he was instrumental in defending Libya against Italian forces. He became a member of the Imperial Ottoman family after marrying Nadia Sultan, and he was appointed as the Minister of War. He entered into an alliance with Germany, but suffered a bad defeat at the border outpost of Sarikamish in Armenia, where he then decided to lead a campaign against Russia. This seemingly brought his sociopathic nature out into the open, as he took the defeat badly and turned on the Armenian soldiers in his army. He ordered that they all be stripped of their weapons and titles, after which they were sent to labor battalions, but there they were summarily executed. To explain this abhorrent behavior, he claimed that all of these soldiers had committed treason, which was of course a lie. He then turned to the Armenian public and decided to enact his vengeance on them as well. He utilized a branch of the Ottoman military known as the Special Organization, which was kept secret from the public. The organization was led by a doctor named Behedin Shakir, and he, along with his staff, was ordered to end as many Armenian lives as he could. In 1915, Pasha ordered that all Armenian political organizations in the Ottoman Empire be disbanded, and that any Armenian people who were associated with these organizations be arrested. He asserted that these groups were being influenced by outside forces such as Russia, and that this was causing upheavals within the Ottoman military. In just 2 days, as many as 270 Armenians were taken into custody. This included politicians, members of the clergy, doctors, writers, journalists, teachers, and lawyers, among others. Most of those arrested were then executed, and this is considered by many historians to be the beginning of Pasha's worst atrocities. He then ordered that a mass deportation of Armenians be carried out, and after this was done, those who were forced out of the country received no aid from the Ottoman Empire, and they were forced to march through the Armenian desert with no food, water, or shelter. When some of the world's politicians found out about these deportations, they confronted him, and on several occasions he was met by Henry Morgenthau, the U.S. ambassador at the time. He tried to dissuade Pasha from this practice, but Pasha stood firm, stating that his policy of deportation would not be changed in any way. He added that he was happy for the Armenian people to live in the desert, and that he would not allow them anywhere near Anatolia. He then went one step further and demanded that Morgenthau hand over the names of anyone who held insurance policies belonging to Armenian people, so that these funds could be used by his state, but his request was promptly dismissed. Pasha then stated that any further attempts to dissuade him would be futile, as he'd already managed to end the lives of 3/4 of the Armenian people. But he would meet his end in August of 1922, when Yakov Melkumov, the commander of the Armenian Red Army, launched a surprise attack against him. Number 1. Joanna Denny, who's now known to be a serial killer, showed no signs of sociopathy while she was a child. She was born in St. Albans in Hertfordshire, England in 1982, and while she later claimed that she was abused as a child, no supporting evidence has ever been found. She and her younger sister had a very normal childhood, according to her friends and family, and the siblings were very close, so much so that they created their own secret language that only they understood. She loved playing with her dolls, and would often play with makeup, dress in fancy outfits, and try out different hairstyles while playing. Those who knew the family have stated that her parents were strict, but never became overly protective. She was a good student while attending Roundwood Park School in Harpenden, and she was slated to attend university once she graduated from high school. Her parents hoped that she'd become a lawyer, and didn't spare any expense on extra lessons. She was also physically fit, as she played for her school's hockey and netball teams, and by all accounts, she seemed like any other normal teenager. But she soon started hanging out with a group of older boys, and she started skipping lessons. She then ran away from home with 20-year-old John Traynor when she was just 15 years old, and her family frantically searched for her. The pair was eventually found living in a wasteland area not far from their house. But by this time, things had started going very wrong for Joanna. She had become addicted to illegal substances, drinking alcohol, and when she turned 16, she decided to leave the family home to forge a life for herself. But she would run out of money and had to resort to asking her family for aid. She and Traynor moved to Milton Keynes, and before long they had 2 children. She told her parents that they could see the children only if they paid for the privilege, and hence their relationship ended there. She was unfaithful to Traynor, and had affairs with different men and women over the next few years. She would sometimes disappear for a few weeks at a time, and upon her return home, begged Traynor to forgive her. The couple then moved to East Anglia, where she worked on farms, but her behavior became even worse. She regularly assaulted Traynor, and started telling her friends that she wanted to know what it felt like to end someone's life. Traynor eventually had enough, and in 2009, he decided to take the children to start a new life elsewhere. Joanna's bad behavior continued, and at times she resorted to street work to support her addictions. She was eventually arrested, after which it was discovered that she showed sociopathic tendencies, for which she received treatment, but she was also diagnosed as a masochist later on. Then, in March of 2013, Joanna's life took the ultimate turn for the worse. She'd met a man named Lukas Slabashevsky, who shared her love of alcohol and prohibited substances, and she invited him to meet her at an address in Peterborough. Upon his arrival, he was expecting the usual alcohol and illegal substances, but as soon as he stepped inside, Joanna lunged at him with a sharpened blade and ended his life. She then ended the life of her roommate, John Chapman, and her landlord, Kevin Lee, who was also her boss. She fled to Hereford, where she tried to end the lives of 2 more men, but failed. She was arrested after a manhunt and sentenced to spend the rest of her life in prison. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knott, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.